The year was 1944, and deep inside Japan's Naval Intelligence headquarters, some of the brightest cryptographers in the empire sat in silent frustration. Intercepted American radio traffic filled their rooms, messages that arrived with precise timing before attacks, messages that followed the rhythms of military communication, yet remained utterly indecipherable. For years, Japanese intelligence had prided itself on breaking Allied codes. They had cracked American diplomatic messages, penetrated British naval ciphers, and even unraveled State Department communications. But this was different. These transmissions were structured like language, but not like any they had ever studied. It wasn't English, German, or Chinese. It wasn't even one of the countless Pacific dialects their linguists had catalogued. To the empire's most skilled analysts, it was alien. What they did not know was that the Americans had entrusted their most sensitive battlefield communications to a group of young men from the deserts and mesas of the American Southwest. Men whose first language was spoken by fewer than 200,000 people. A language with sounds absent from most of the world's tongues. A language so complex in tone and structure that even lifelong students of linguistics would find themselves lost. These were the Navajo Code Talkers, and they were about to change the course of the Pacific War. While Japanese commanders demanded answers from their cryptographic units, thousands of miles away, Navajo Marines crouched beside radios on islands like Guadalcanal and Iwo Jima, transmitting orders that could turn the tide of battle in seconds. Their voices, carried across the static of war, sounded like nothing the Japanese could break. To the enemy, it was noise. To the Marines, it was lifeline. And in those transmissions lived a secret so powerful that it remained unbroken for the entirety of World War II. To understand how such an unbreakable system came into existence, you need to step far away from the battlefields of the Pacific and into the vast canyons and deserts of the American Southwest. For centuries, the Navajo people had preserved a language unlike any other on Earth. Rich in tone, layered in meaning, and impossible to master without growing up inside the culture, it was a tongue designed not for conquest but for survival. Few outsiders ever spoke it fluently. Among them was Philip Johnston, the son of a missionary who had lived on the reservation since childhood. Johnston knew Navajo as more than just words. He understood its rhythm, its precision, and the way a single phrase could shift meaning entirely depending on tone. When America entered the war after Pearl Harbor, Johnston saw what most military men could not. This was not just a language, it was a fortress. At the time, the U.S. military was desperate for a secure means of communication. Machines like the M209 cipher were slow, requiring precious minutes to encode even short messages, and every delay meant lives lost. Enemy codebreakers were relentless, always searching for patterns. Johnston approached Marine Corps officials with a radical idea: train Navajo speakers to develop a code within their own language, fast, adaptable, and impenetrable. Skeptical at first, the officers agreed to a demonstration. 4 Navajo men were given a message to translate and send, while a conventional cipher machine was used for the same task. The Navajo transmission took 20 seconds. The machine required nearly half an hour. The result was undeniable. In May 1942, 29 Navajo recruits were sworn in at Fort Wingate, New Mexico. They weren't just enlisting as Marines, they were about to become the guardians of an unbreakable code. Inside a guarded building at Camp Elliott near San Diego, the first Navajo recruits began their secret work. The task was monumental: invent an entirely new military code within their language, one flexible enough to handle modern warfare, yet simple enough to use under fire. They started with the basics. Terms that didn't exist in Navajo, like submarine or grenade, had to be created through metaphor. A submarine became iron fish. A battleship was whale. Fighter planes were hummingbirds, swift and darting through the air. For letters of the alphabet, they designed multiple Navajo words for each letter, preventing any pattern from forming. Every recruit memorized these terms by heart. No codebooks existed. Nothing could risk falling into enemy hands. Drills were relentless. The men practiced until every translation was instinctive, every phrase lightning fast. Mistakes weren't an option, because a single error in the field could mean an artillery barrage falling on their own troops. As one of the original recruits later recalled, "We drilled endlessly. In our culture, words have power. Speaking correctly was sacred." This sacred responsibility now extended into battle. Their first real test came on Guadalcanal in August 1942. Japanese cryptographers had been confident they could predict American moves. Then, suddenly, the flow of U.S. messages shifted. Orders, coordinates, and reports arrived in what sounded like nonsense. When Marines needed artillery fire on a Japanese machine gun nest, a code talker transmitted the coordinates in Navajo. 14 seconds later, shells tore into the target. The Japanese intercepted the message, but it meant nothing to them. To the Marines, it was life-saving precision. That moment proved what Johnston had promised. The code was not just secure, it was faster and more reliable than anything the military had ever seen. As word of the code's success spread, more Navajo men were recruited, and soon the Marine Corps had dozens of code talkers embedded in units across the Pacific. With every new campaign, their importance grew. At Tarawa, Saipan, and later in the Marianas, Navajo voices carried the weight of entire operations. They sent thousands of messages under fire, none of them ever deciphered, none of them ever mistaken. The Japanese, who prided themselves on superior intelligence work, were stunned. They could identify patterns of timing, even guess at message length or urgency, but the language itself was a wall they could not climb. Inside Japanese intelligence offices, desperation turned to obsession. Linguists were summoned, recordings analyzed, and even scholars of ancient Asian languages consulted. Nothing worked. At one point, the Japanese captured a Navajo soldier who was not a code talker but a regular serviceman. Believing he held the key, they tortured him mercilessly, demanding translations. But he couldn't provide what he didn't know. He recognized the words but not their hidden military meanings. In the end, his inability to help convinced Japanese intelligence that this code was something beyond ordinary cryptography. It wasn't simply a matter of substitution or frequency analysis. It was a living, breathing language that had been transformed into a weapon. For the Marines, this weapon was priceless. On the beaches of Iwo Jima, 6 code talkers worked around the clock for the first 48 hours, sending and receiving over 800 messages without error. They directed airstrikes, coordinated naval fire, and relayed troop movements, all while shells exploded around them. One Marine officer later declared, "Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima." For Japan, that battle sealed the truth. The American code was unbreakable. Victory in the Pacific owed much to the steady voices of the Navajo Marines, yet when the war ended, their story remained locked away. The program was classified, kept secret in case the code might be needed again. For the young men who had carried such an extraordinary burden, silence became their only option. They returned home to reservations still marked by poverty, to states that in some cases didn't even grant them the right to vote. In uniform they were heroes, but out of uniform they were once again treated as outsiders. Some were denied service at restaurants. Others struggled to find work. They had helped win one of the greatest wars in history, but they couldn't tell anyone how. The secrecy was suffocating. Families asked questions, but the code talkers could only shrug, bound by duty and by law. Many carried heavy memories, transmitting coordinates that led to destruction, watching comrades fall while their radios crackled with orders. In Navajo tradition, words are sacred. To use them as weapons created wounds no metal could heal. Some men sought traditional ceremonies to cleanse themselves, rituals meant to restore balance after battle. The enemy way ceremony, practiced for generations, became a path toward peace. But even healing required silence about the work that had made them warriors in the first place. Decades passed before the curtain finally lifted. In 1968, the program was declassified. Only then did the full scale of their contribution begin to emerge. Historians learned that between 375 and 420 Navajo Marines had served as code talkers, transmitting tens of thousands of flawless messages. For the United States, it was one of the greatest cryptographic triumphs of the century. For the code talkers, it was long overdue recognition of a service they had given in secret. Recognition came slowly, but when it arrived, it carried the weight of gratitude long overdue. In 1982, President Ronald Reagan declared August 14th as National Navajo Code Talkers Day. 2 decades later, the surviving original 29 were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal in Washington, D.C. They stood in the Capitol Rotunda, old men now, but carrying the same quiet pride they had in their youth. One spoke for all of them, saying, "We were ordinary men given an extraordinary task. We used our sacred language to help win the war." For once, the nation listened. Beyond the ceremonies and medals, their legacy reached deeper. The very language the government once tried to suppress in boarding schools, where Navajo children were punished for speaking their mother tongue, had become the key to victory in the Pacific. What had been treated as weakness was revealed to be strength. Their story became a reminder not only of military triumph, but of cultural survival. They had turned heritage into weapon and then into legacy. The irony was profound. A language nearly silenced had saved countless lives and changed the outcome of battles thousands of miles away. Today, the number of surviving code talkers is dwindling. Their voices, once carried through radios in the smoke of war, are now preserved in books, documentaries, and classrooms. But their message is larger than the battles they fought. It is about resilience. It is about diversity as strength. It is about the idea that sometimes the most powerful weapon a nation has is not its machines or its technology, but the people and cultures within it. The Navajo Code Talkers proved that America's greatest encryption was not a device, but its diversity, unbreakable, because it is human.